Ever wondered how a humble fish could nearly cause a military showdown between two nations? Buckle up! We're about to dive into the curious tale of the Cod Wars. Yes, you heard that right. Wars, plural. Not one, not two, but three separate incidents, all revolving around a fish. These fishy disputes took place over a span of 2 decades, from the 50s to the 70s. The combatants, Iceland and the United Kingdom, two nations not typically known for their military aggression. But when it came to the right to fish in the bountiful waters of the North Atlantic, things got heated. These weren't your typical wars. There were no bombs or bullets involved. Instead, the weapons of choice were fishing nets and trawlers. Intrigued? You should be. So how did these wars start? To answer that, we need to dive deep into the icy waters of the North Atlantic. Flashback to 1958 and our fishy tale begins. Iceland, a small island nation in the North Atlantic, made a move that would ripple across the seas and spark off the first of the so-called Cod Wars. Iceland extended its fishing limits from 4 to 12 nautical miles off its coast. Now, why was that a big deal? Well, these waters were teeming with cod, a valuable resource for both Iceland and the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, a maritime powerhouse, was not thrilled with this new development. British trawlers had been fishing these waters for decades, and the new extension threatened their livelihood. The UK refused to recognize Iceland's extended fishing limits, leading to a standoff that would escalate into a full-blown conflict on the high seas. In the cold, choppy waters of the North Atlantic, British trawlers continued their operations, escorted by Royal Navy warships. On the other side, the Icelandic Coast Guard patrolled their newly claimed waters, ready to defend their territorial claims. As you can imagine, this didn't exactly make for peaceful sailing. Confrontations were frequent and intense. The Icelandic Coast Guard would attempt to cut the fishing lines of the British trawlers, while the Royal Navy intervened to protect their fishing vessels. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse, with high stakes for both nations. This maritime tug-of-war continued for 3 years, with neither side willing to back down. It took intervention from NATO to finally bring an end to the First Cod War in 1961. The UK agreed to limited fishing within the 12 nautical mile zone, but the issue was far from resolved. And just like that, the First Cod War ended, but not without leaving the waters a bit turbulent. The stage was set for further conflict, as both nations had tasted the bitter tang of this fishy feud. The cod were still swimming, the trawlers were still trawling, and the waters of the North Atlantic were far from calm. As the saying goes, history repeats itself. And so, in 1972, the Second Cod War began. Imagine a round 2. Not of a boxing match, but a fish-fueled feud between Iceland and the United Kingdom. This time, Iceland decided to extend its exclusive fishing limits yet again, this time to a whopping 50 nautical miles. That's roughly the distance from New York City to Stamford, Connecticut. But instead of a traffic-jammed I-95, picture a vast, fish-filled ocean. Now, if you thought the First Cod War was intense, buckle up, because things were about to get seriously fishy. This wasn't just a matter of Iceland and the UK fighting over who got the biggest catch of the day. No, this was about national pride, economic survival, and geopolitical power. It was about small Iceland standing its ground against the mighty British Empire. As Iceland cast its fishing net wider, the UK, understandably, was not thrilled. Tensions escalated faster than a marlin on a fishing line. British trawlers continued to fish in the disputed waters, protected by their naval warships. Meanwhile, Iceland, not one to back down, deployed its Coast Guard armed with nothing more than patrol boats and, believe it or not, some seriously strong cables. Yes, you heard that right. Iceland's weapon of choice was a type of net cutter, a device that could sever the fishing nets of the British trawlers. It was a bold move, and it led to numerous clashes at sea. Ships collided, nets were cut, and the North Atlantic became a battleground, all because of cod. The situation became so dire that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, had to intervene. Despite being allies in the organization, the UK and Iceland were at odds, and it was up to NATO to mediate the dispute. The second round of this fishy feud ended in 1973, but the peace was as fleeting as a fish's memory. In 1975, the tension bubbled up once again, giving rise to the third and final Cod War. This time, Iceland was flexing its maritime muscles even further, extending its exclusive fishing zone to a whopping 200 nautical miles off its coast. The United Kingdom, as you might expect, was less than thrilled with this development. The confrontations between the two nations escalated to previously unseen levels. There were intense maritime chases, nets cut, and even collisions between the warships and trawlers. It was like an action-packed Hollywood blockbuster, except, well, it was about fish. Meanwhile, technology was making its presence felt on the high seas. The Icelanders had developed a new weapon, the net cutter. This was a device fitted to the Icelandic Coast Guard's vessels, designed to sever the fishing nets of British trawlers. It was a game changer, effectively neutralizing the British vessels without causing significant harm to the crew. British fishermen were sailing into a storm of economic and physical danger. The British government, in an attempt to protect its fishing fleet, deployed Royal Navy vessels to the disputed waters. But even the presence of the Navy couldn't stop the relentless cutting of nets by the Icelanders. The impact of the conflict on the fishing industry was devastating. Many British trawlers were left with no choice but to stay out of the disputed waters, leading to a significant drop in the UK's cod catch. The livelihoods of many fishermen and the communities they supported were in jeopardy. Behind the scenes, diplomatic efforts were underway to resolve the issue. Under pressure from other NATO countries and after a year of dramatic confrontations, the UK finally conceded to Iceland's 200-mile limit in mid-1976. And with that, the Cod Wars came to an end. But what did we learn from these fish fights? The Cod Wars were more than just about fish. They were about national pride, economic survival, and the changing nature of international law. And they served as a stark reminder that even seemingly small disputes can escalate into full-blown conflicts when national interests are at stake. So, after all the nets were cast and the fish were caught, what's the catch of this story? Well, let's reel it in. The Cod Wars marked a significant shift in international maritime law. Before the Cod Wars, the accepted territorial waters extended only 12 nautical miles from a country's coastline. But Iceland, the underdog in this tale, fought tooth and nail, or should we say hook, line, and sinker, to extend that limit to 200 nautical miles. This extension was a game changer. It not only secured Iceland's fishing industry, but also set a precedent for other countries. So next time you enjoy your fish and chips, remember, it's not just a meal, it's a symbol of international law and economic sovereignty. Now let's talk about the relationship between the UK and Iceland. You might think that after 3 rounds of Cod Wars, things would be pretty frosty between the two. But no, these two have managed to keep their cool, proving that it's possible to go from adversaries to allies. The Cod Wars were a lesson in diplomacy and negotiation. The UK and Iceland, despite their differences, managed to find a resolution without escalating the conflict into a full-blown war. So, if two nations can find common ground over something as slippery as fish, surely there's hope for the rest of us. But perhaps the most important takeaway from the Cod Wars is this: never underestimate the power of the little guy, or in this case, the little fish. Iceland may be small, but it stood up for its rights and won. It's a David and Goliath story with a seafood twist. So next time you hear about a dispute over resources, remember the Cod Wars. Remember that it's not just about the resource itself, but about sovereignty, economy, and the rights of nations. And who knows, maybe next time it'll be a war over lobster or shrimp. Now, wouldn't that be a shell of a story? And there you have it, the tale of the Cod Wars, proof that even the smallest fish can make a big splash in the sea of international politics.